There's a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture.
You like me right now. You like me.
Ever since I was a little kid, I wanted this.
Mom, I just want an Oscar.
I'm Arnold, and welcome back to another episode of the Ultimate Oscar Showdown, a weekly series where I rank Oscar winners from a certain decade. We've already covered the Best Picture winners from the 2010s all the way to the 1940s, ranked all of those winners. Now we're into the Best Actor part of this series. Then when we're done with the Best Actor series in the 70s, we're going to go back to the Best Actress category, rank those winners from the decades of the 2010s to the 70s, and then the supporting categories later on. So still early on in the grand scheme of things, but you guys have been showing a lot of love for this series. I know you guys are a lot of Oscar fans who've stayed around since old Oscar Countdown, so I hope you appreciate a little bit of my thoughts and a little bit of Oscar history and analysis. That's what we like to do on the show. But this week, we're going to be jumping into the 90s, looking at every single winner from 1990 all the way to 1999. I'm going to rank them on a tier-based system. So not 1 to 10, but from S tier all the way to D tier, S being the highest, then A, B, C, D. You can check my past videos to sort of understand where my other thoughts are, but ultimately at the end of the day, when I give my thoughts, particularly on the performances, I'm only talking about the performances, not necessarily the movie, but the performance within the movie, my thoughts on that. But without further ado, let's jump into things, starting off with 1990 winner Jeremy Irons for Reversal of Fortune, which was a first-time watch for me this time around. I hadn't seen the film, and it's a little bit of a forgotten Oscar film in many ways. I would actually think about covering it if it got nominated for Best Picture, because it's a movie that didn't make a lot of money at the box office. Jeremy Irons is an actor that I sometimes even forget even has an Oscar, because he's more of a character actor to me than, say, an A-list movie star. The director is not super well known, so it's a little bit of a hidden gem in that regard, but a very enjoyable movie, what I found. It reminds me a lot, almost as a precursor to a lot of the 90s legal thrillers. So we have the sort of Grisham movies with The Firm and Pelican Brief and The Rainmaker, and sort of those movies that launched a lot of young stars in their careers. This is a lawyer movie, entertaining 90s sort of legal drama, but not actually based on a true story, versus the Grisham stuff are a little bit more over the top. But I think it's in a similar vein in terms of its pacing, in terms of its intrigue. You can even connect this to, say, the modern true crime boom that we see. I think people have always been interested in sort of some of these more public cases, of which this is one of, and then adapted into a real-life story movie, in which Irons plays an English socialite who marries an American woman, and then she gets put into a coma, and he is accused of murdering her, essentially, and is about to go to jail, but hires a new lawyer, Alan Dershowitz, for the appeal process. So we're in the situation where everyone hates him, everyone thinks he killed his wife. I think a lot of us as viewers coming on think, oh, he's probably a bad guy, and then we start to have, different viewpoints, different ideas, and we never really maybe know the full truth, because it's based on a true story, but we get maybe a little different viewpoints, and the way you see things may sort of color your perception of who actually did or did not do the offense. And I think that's the success of this film, is that Irons can sort of play it both ways. He can play it as a sort of innocent man, or he can play it as sort of a devious killer. You're not necessarily exactly sure what to believe, and Irons is a great actor at sort of keeping that uncertainty throughout the film. He doesn't really go, the man proclaims his innocence, but still tries to keep things close to the vest. He's very sort of charismatic, maybe manipulative too, and sort of like this sort of creepy, charming, simultaneous performance, which I think for a lot of people, Irons has been a working actor, for 10 years before this, but I think for a lot of people, this was a new sort of level that they hadn't seen Irons really do before, and he's so great at, and I think he's really terrific at that. Although reading reviews and seeing sort of perception at the time, they really sort of emphasized the fact that this guy was creepy or sort of, weird. I don't know if it's, compared to what we're used to today, it's not necessarily of that level, like a Joker level, which I would sort of consider creepy, or even, a Hannibal Lecter type of performance. And I do think the film, at least in my viewpoint, hurts it a bit, because the performance of Jeremy Irons, his approach to this character, I've seen done in other movies before I'd seen this movie. Now this may be the first instance of that, so I think people were impressed by that, but just because I'd seen him do that in some other movies, this was maybe a little bit less effective for me, but still entertaining legal drama in which Irons has a great performance in that sort of did he do it, did he not do it, back and forth. The performance in many ways keeps the entertainment of the film. So I'm going to put this one in the B tier. Then we have the 1991 winner Anthony Hopkins for The Silence of the Lambs. What is there to say? This is an iconic performance. It is really the defining portrayal of Hannibal Lecter, in my opinion, even though there's been many great actors to do it. I still think of this movie and I think of Anthony Hopkins together. Of course, one of the few Best Actor winners with such short screen time. I think only David Nevin from Separate Tables, a movie we've covered on this channel, has won Best Lead Actor with such small screen time. Yet when you think about the movie, you think of him, which is why I think people vote for him for Best Lead Actor, even though he's not in the movie that often. His presence looms so large. And just the way in which Anthony Hopkins is almost able to transform his face without prosthetics, to just the way he uses his eyes and that sort of devilish grin to stare right into your soul. Of course, Jonathan Demme uses a lot of those sort of look directly into the camera framing, those back and forth between Jodie Foster's character and Anthony Hopkins' character are so smart, and just the way Anthony Hopkins portrays them as almost a predator trying to get after a prey, in which he is so manipulative, in which he is so clearly intellectual and intelligent, but he's trying to sort of manipulate her words. He's trying to get into her head. He's going to bury your way in to sort of make you think about him. And what that does, in part combined with the sort of front-facing, directly look into the camera cinematography, it creates that same effect with us. He burrows into our mind. We can't stop thinking about him. We can't stop almost obsessing over it. And he steals every scene very much so. So listen, this is an all-time classic performance, and very rarely do the Oscars actually reward an iconic performance like this. So I'm glad they did, and for me, without a doubt, an S-tier performance. Iconic stuff. Then, 1992, we have Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman, which is a controversial winner, and I think is probably most well known as the movie that got Al Pacino his Oscar. And I talked about my theory last week, how I think this movie isn't a part of the sort of greatest Oscar travesty of all time, in which 1974, Art Carney beat out Al Pacino for The Godfather Part 2, because that was sort of a legacy award. Let's give it to the old man. Then that means Al Pacino has to win his legacy award for a movie that's probably not as deserving. In this movie, 92, The Scent of a Woman, which means Denzel Washington from Malcolm X doesn't win, which means he has to get his legacy award for 2002's Training Day, which beats out Will Smith for Ali, and then that means Will Smith has 20 years of trying to win an Oscar, then finally does with King Richard, but then the slap happens, and we don't know what's going to happen with that, but it really is going to, I think, impact his overall legacy. And I would even argue with Will Smith beating out King Richard, Benedict Cumberbatch should have won, and he's probably going to have to win an award 20 years from now for being an English politician of some sort, so real-life English politician, and it'd be an okay movie, but a good performance, and then he wins, and he beats out, I don't know, Timothée Chalamet's best performance. I feel like this is going to continue on, just sort of the Oscars making mistakes and then trying to recorrect them and then making up another mistake in that process. I think, unfortunately, Al Pacino sort of follows in this suit. That being said, I actually still really enjoy this performance. This is a similar performance to me in line with someone like Gary Oldman in Darkest Hour, in which they are so over the top. I love when actors totally come to a character are so over the top, almost non-human, but they become so non-human that they become human again. There's sort of this full circle effect that happens to it, in which I just, in that sort of primal way, love, and I think it's so funny with Al Pacino doing all the hoo-ahs and over the top, and just seeing, how can he take this line and say the most strange way of saying it? He does that, and this is a great example of that. It's a transformation in terms of his career, where it's not the sort of 70s quiet, reserved Pacino. It's the strange, over-the-top, really powerful, a little bit odd Al Pacino what we see throughout the 90s with movies like Heat or Devil's Advocate. So it gets all the sort of funny, charming parts of the movie, but I also think he establishes and nails the emotional parts of the character too. So much so that when we had that final verdict, and we hear the verdict and everyone leaps to their feet and cheers, it feels emotional, it feels good. And he gives a nice hoo-ah, and you feel sort of emotional and swept up within the sort of chronicling of the sort of father-son-like mentorship that happens within the film. So it's an over-the-top performance, yes. It's a ridiculous type of performance, yes. But I think it's a great sort of late Sunday afternoon movie that I like to just throw on and watch. And a performance I do really enjoy. So it's an A-tier movie for me. Then we have the 1993 winner, Tom Hanks in Philadelphia, another Jonathan Demme movie to win Best Lead Actor, and Hanks' first Oscar win. Although thinking back on it, when you look at Hanks' entire career, I don't think we talk too much about Philadelphia. It's almost an underseen, under-discussed sort of a movie, because when you think of Hanks, I'd say probably Toy Story, Forrest Gump, Saving Private Ryan. Those are sort of the big type of movies. You can even say something like Apollo 13 or Catch Me If You Can, or certain some of these movies, and less so Philadelphia. I think in part because it's maybe not a super rewatchable movie, because it's more of a heavier movie in terms of its subject. But what I love so much about Hank's performance is that it's directly in line with the movie's goals, because the movie is, its plot is not necessarily directly related to being gay or AIDS. It's just about a man who has been unlawfully fired from his job because he has AIDS, and he's a lawyer himself, so he wants to get a lawyer to help him out and get what's compensated to him. And on that regard, it could just be replace AIDS with, say, a cancer or another disease in which someone just got unlawfully fired. That's the way Hank sort of plays his character as just a regular guy. Let's not forget, playing a gay character during this time was still very challenging and taboo within Hollywood. And they don't necessarily they never really got correct until, I'd say, the 2000s. And you look at a performance like Greg Kinnear in As Good As It Gets. That's a very sort of stereotypical performance. Let's not forget, this is before Will and Grace sort of reinvented stuff. So Hank's portrayal of this is actually kind of revolutionary given its time period, and that's what I like about the performance, is that he does sort of play it straight. He doesn't play it as this sort of flamboyant gay stereotype. He plays it just as a regular guy who has this disease, who needs to sort of get his compensation back. Now, that's the plot of the movie. Now, obviously, the subtext of the movie is everything about him being gay and AIDS being a gay disease, and the fact that Denzel Washington doesn't even want to shake his hand, and he doesn't take his case at first. And it's very much this sort of secret under thing where we don't like your lifestyle, therefore we don't want to deal with you. We don't want to sort of confront that. And Hanks plays it in a very sort of decent, humanist way that Demi is so great at, but also Hanks is so great at. When we think of Hanks, we think of him as the sort of American dad, as sort of the sort of just everyman. So we see him as this sort of outsider, minority character. It's a great combination, because he's not doing something transformative. He's not being over the top or having these big speeches. He's just a regular guy trying to get what's owed to him. And that's kind of the genius of the performance, is that he doesn't go over the top. At times when he could be over dramatic, he doesn't. It's a more subtler, generic, almost regular guy kind of performance. But in the context of the film, that's what they're trying to say, that this is just a regular person, that their lifestyle doesn't have anything to do with them being sort of crazy or over the top or an other of sorts. It's just a regular person. Hank's sort of everyday mindset and approach to acting within this film is just so well suited to the goals of the film, and it's so well aligned, if that makes any sense. So Hanks is great here, and a very subtle, traditional sort of performance, but a very excellent performance in which it aligns with the goals of the movie and with the movies and the themes of the movie and what it's trying to say. So for me, it's an A-tier performance. Then in 1994, Tom Hanks wins again, one of the very few back-to-back winners for Forrest Gump. And what I just said about Tom Hanks in Philadelphia, these sort of understated, subtle, everyman kind of performance, is almost the opposite here with Forrest Gump. He tries to do something completely different, in which he's putting on all the tics, all the actor tricks. He's got, weird stilted emotions. He's playing this guy who's clearly, slower. He's got this weird southern style of slow speaking that was all sort of, newly invented by Hanks. I don't hate this movie. As a matter of fact, I like it. However, if you were to sort of rub against one thing within the movie, it'd be sort of that portrayal as it would imply sort of mentally slow a man in Forrest. That is not necessarily direct, but my sort of issues, I guess, with the performance at times is it can feel over the top. It can feel like Hanks is pulling out all the tricks. It can feel like, he's trying to do something different. The way he even, shows emotion is so robotic. It doesn't always make Forrest feel like a real character rather than, a figment of, say, Eric Roth's imagination. It feels like they're putting on all these little tricks to make him feel different, to make Hanks look and be different than the character. But truthfully, at the end of the day, I do see Hanks trying to put on some weird affectation just to be different rather than actually portraying a real life person or an actual character, a three-dimensional character, I mean. But of course, you can't deny the fact that this character has been iconic. And when we think of some of the most iconic parts of the movie, Life Was Like a Box of Chocolates, even the way Hank says Bubba these aren't necessarily super poetic lines. They're good lines, but they're iconic because of the way Hank says them, the way he says Bubba, the way he says the life was like a box of chocolates line. That's what makes it special. So the fact that he was able to create this iconic character has to be enough of an appreciation. And I do think his sort of take on the character is interesting in a weird, kind of strange way, even though it's a little bit maybe over the top and a little bit too strange for my liking. It's still, it's a Halloween costume. It's an iconic character. You gotta respect that at the very least. So it'll go in the B tier for me. Then Nicolas Cage in Leaving Las Vegas. This was a movie I hadn't seen before too, and I'd heard a lot of great things and lots of recommendations. So I was a little bit surprised to see Nicolas Cage be less subtle and more over the top, closer to Vampire's Kiss performance than, say, a Pig performance. And I felt like this movie needed maybe more of a Pig type performance, but got a Vampire's Kiss performance. I mean, he's really over the top. I always thought of this as, oh, this is Cage winning his Oscar. This is a little bit more subtle, a little bit more reserved. And it's not. Because he's drunk, most of the time he can be loud and obnoxious and over the top. And Cage's acting style, I think can be used well, and is sort of it's a unique approach to acting, and it can't be put into every movie. He wouldn't work as a Michael Corleone necessarily in Godfather Part 2, but he's great in a movie like Con Air. So his acting style, because it's so unique, it has to be served right. It has to be utilized correctly. And I actually don't think it works super well here in Leaving Las Vegas. I'd much rather have a more serious, subtle approach to the character for such a serious kind of a topic in alcoholism. So just, not a performance for me. I thought it was a little bit miscalibrated. So it's going to go into the C tier. Then Geoffrey Rush was the 1996 winner for the movie Shine, which was another first-time watch for me. And this was a really surprising watch for me because Geoffrey Rush is not the lead of the movie. He doesn't come in until the last 30 minutes of the movie. It's mostly about the younger version of Geoffrey Rush's character and his relationship with his father. And Rush is barely in the movie. I mean, he's definitely not a lead character. And when he is in the movie, he has this sort of strange stutter. I think that's clearly the reason why he won, because he had this sort of weird way of talking that sort of impressed a lot of people. And then you'd hear Geoffrey Rush being this, very well-spoken British man, definitely not like the character. So I think there was some appreciation of that from actors. But someone needs to explain this performance to me, because he's barely in the movie, so I think that takes a few notches off for me. And then when he is in the movie, he does this sort of such strange stuttering aspect that it almost takes you out of the movie. And once again, I feels like somebody doing a trick, or an actor doing something to try to make you feel like they're a real person. So unfortunately, he's just not in a lot of the movie, and he doesn't make an impact. And the choices that he does make, really just the one choice that he makes, didn't really sort of work for me. I know it's based on a true story, but still, Geoffrey Rush's impact on the movie wasn't large enough to win, say, a Best Lead Actor award. Then in 1997, we have Jack Nicholson in As Good as It Gets, which is a performance that tests my love for Jack Nicholson, in which he plays a man who is outwardly racist and homophobic and just a total jerk, but it's okay because he has OCD, I guess. This was a movie that really sort of befuddles me. I've seen it a couple times now, and the charm never totally turns on. I think for the goal of the movie being, let's take this really unlikable guy and make him likable by the end of the movie. And if anybody were to do that, it'd be a really charming actor like Jack Nicholson. And I'll give the movies credit in that he does become more likable by the end of the movie, but he doesn't become likable. He becomes just less unlikable, essentially. At the end of the day, I still don't like his character. I think the romance is forced. I know this was a big sort of deal at the time, but looking back on it, I don't think it's a movie that's aged quite well, and the Jack Nicholson charm can only carry you so far. So for me, it's a C tier movie. Then 1998, Roberto Benigni for Life is Beautiful, a movie that is a performance that is a classic example of people really liking the character in the movie and then meeting the person in real life, and they're like the character in the movie, and then it's just like more of the movie. We see this with this case here, but Cuba Gooding Jr. and Jerry Maguire, or I'd say Troy Kotzer in Coda, in which people just really like the character in the movie, and then find out the character in the movie is actually just the person in real life to a certain extent, and they just sort of get caught up in that. And listen, I'd be caught up with this too, because Roberto Benigni seems like such a charming Italian man that if you saw sort of his cartoonish energy in real life, you'd be overwhelmed by it as well, I assume. And But speaking of the performance itself, I do think it's an excellent performance, if a little bit one note. It works well with the movie. I think the fact that he's this sort of larger-than-life, cartoonish type character adds a lot of the humor and slapstick element to the film, but then of course it's a very serious topic, so he does get some sort of serious, weighty scenes, trying to convince his son that this is, just a game, that the concentration camp is just a game, and then you have to win a certain amount of points to get out, and that sort of back and forth does allow for some of the more serious elements for Bernini to show off that side, but for the most part, it's pretty one note. It's pretty sort of over the top and silly and funny and sort of mime-like, but still enjoyable. So I know while some people don't like this performance just because they think of the Oscars and they think of the seat jumping and the sort of corniness of it all, but the movie is genuinely affecting, and I do think his performance works well within it. So it's going to go into the B tier for me. And then in 1999, we have Kevin Spacey for American Beauty, which is a movie I like actually in spite of Kevin Spacey's performance. I think this is a period where people really enjoyed Kevin Spacey, and they liked him from Usual Suspects, and they wanted to give him another award, and this was a big Best Picture winner, and it was feel very important at the time. And it's a movie I still enjoy and rewatched, and really tried to give a hard analytical look back when I covered it for the 90s Best Picture video. But even still, when I did that, a month ago now, a couple months ago now, I rewatched it for that episode, and I'm almost having issues remembering a lot of Kevin Spacey's big standout scenes, because he doesn't have too many of them. I think he does what is asked. He's sort of generic and boring when he has his job, then when he quits his job, he's sort of sly and sarcastic in a good sort of Kevin Spacey-esque way later on in the movie, but there's nothing that totally stands out from his performance for me. I think he does his job and plays that character appropriately, but if anything, my issue with the film is with that character and with that performance. I actually like the other performers within the film more. So it's a movie that works, I think, in spite of his performance. So while I actually do enjoy the movie, his performance has never been something for me. So it's going to go into the C tier. So there's the list. Maybe a little bit of a disappointing year, a little bit of a disappointing video. I thought the 2000s and 2010s had some classic S-tier performances, but this decade only had one, and that's some lower tier ones. So truthfully, sort of that period there from 95 to 99, I really only liked one of the performances. It's a little disappointing on that regard, but the 80s come back and get some good winners, so that will be fun to talk about next week. But that's been it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts. Give me your tier ranking for the 1990s actor winners. I'd love to hear that in the comments down below. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.